Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere where your GPS might just give up. Your lips will chap in 5 minutes flat, and everything around you looks like a snowstorm paused mid flurry. Welcome to Colchani, a tiny South American town made almost entirely out of salt blocks, sitting like a glitch in the landscape at the edge of the world's largest salt flat. Imagine this. You step outside, and there's nothing but blinding white in every direction. Not a cloud, not a tree. Just an endless sheet of what looks like ice but crunches like gravel. The sun reflects so fiercely off the ground, it's like staring into a mirror held up by nature itself. You squint through the dry air, and on the horizon, the outline of a town begins to shimmer into view. Not made of stone or wood or clay, but of crystallized salt. But don't get too cozy yet. This is 12,000 feet above sea level. That's higher than most mountain ski resorts. The air is razor thin and dry enough to mummify a raisin. You'll need to breathe slowly. And yes, you'll want sunglasses, unless you're really into the feeling of retinal regret. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ground crunches beneath your boots. Not gravel, salt. Powdery white ridges stretch like frozen ripples in every direction. This isn't snow, and you're not hallucinating. You're standing at the edge of Salar de Uyuni, the world's largest salt flat, over 4,000 square miles of stark brilliance in southern Bolivia. The vast, white plain reflects so perfectly that during rainy season, it turns into a mirror of the sky. But right now, it's dry, crunchy, and dazzling enough to make you wonder if you've wandered into some celestial mistake. Tucked along this otherworldly expanse is Colchani, a small village where salt is more than just a seasoning. It's a way of life. Here, houses aren't built with bricks or concrete. They're stacked with gleaming salt blocks, hand cut from the ground beneath your feet. You approach the village, and it looks like someone placed doll houses onto the moon. There are no tall buildings, no sweeping skyscrapers, just short, blocky structures gleaming faintly under the brutal Andean sun. As you wander closer, a breeze kicks up a whisper of salt dust. It stings slightly. Even your skin knows this is no ordinary air. The silence here is almost hostile. There are no rustling trees, no birdsong. Just the hiss of wind scraping across mineral skin. Scientists still argue over how long a human body could dehydrate just by standing still here. Some say hours, some say days. But either way, you wouldn't want to test it without a thermos and a lot of sunscreen. The town itself is quiet, almost sleepy. A dirt road, white with salt, winds lazily through squat buildings. Doors and window frames look oddly soft, almost like cake fondant. It's all salt, sculpted and baked by sun and air. A few signs are scrawled in Spanish, flaking off weathered boards. There's a small plaza where children kick a soccer ball that's somehow both overinflated and strangely slow. Altitude does strange things to physics. The roofs aren't made of salt. Thankfully, rain, on the rare occasions it visits, is salt's worst enemy. So locals use tin sheets or plastic, weighed down with old tires. Everything's a patchwork here. Modernity meets scarcity with whatever's on hand. A solar panel leans against a salt wall. A satellite dish perches next to a llama skull. There's Wi-Fi in some places, but don't count on it unless you're friends with a cactus. Speaking of cacti, there are none here. Nothing grows. This is a landscape so dry, it eats shadows. Your sweat vanishes before you even feel it. Locals walk slowly, calmly, like they've made peace with the thin air and relentless glare. They wear layers of wool and broad-brimmed hats. Tourists often arrive like caffeinated meerkats, squinting, sweating, and desperate for breath before slowing to a dazed shuffle within 20 minutes. Quirky detail? The salt bricks squeak. If you press your ear to one, and yes, someone has, you might hear the wind pass through tiny cracks and sing a kind of high-pitched song, like a mosquito trapped in a glass. It's haunting and weirdly charming. Locals call it the soul breath of the salt, though that might just be a polite way of saying, please stop licking the architecture. Because yes, tourists have tried, licking the walls, the beds, the floor. One enterprising man in a bucket hat reportedly tried to season his boiled eggs directly on a salt countertop. He was politely removed, not for being wrong, necessarily, but for being very, very enthusiastic about it. Geographers love this place, not just because of the surreal landscape, but because it's a live exhibit of tectonic patience. The salt flats are a kind of frozen geology in motion, formed by the slow evaporation of prehistoric lakes, shaped by the uplift of the Andes, and perpetually thickened by the thin Bolivian sun. But the real twist: scientists still argue over how deep the salt crust actually goes. Some say it's 10 meters. Others suspect hidden pockets that could stretch far deeper, places where you'd fall through and vanish with a puff of salt mist and one very loud, echoey scream. Of course, no one's fallen through yet, but the fear sticks in your mind like an uninvited fact. You look around. Everything's too still. The air is thin, the ground gleams, and the buildings don't feel real. And for a brief second, you wonder, what if this isn't a town at all? What if you wandered into a mirage made solid? A salt dream at the roof of the world? But a kid runs past, chasing a flat-faced puppy made of fluff and determination. Someone yells, "Venga!" from inside a salt doorway. A solar-powered radio crackles to life, leaking out faint cumbia music. You exhale. No dream here, just life, lived, crust first. And this? This is just your first few minutes in Colchani. You step deeper into Colchani now, where life is measured not in hours or days, but in bricks. Salt bricks, to be exact. This isn't some kitschy tourist gimmick. The entire village is built from the stuff. Not inspired by salt or decorated with salt, but quite literally constructed from big, chalky blocks of sodium chloride, cut straight from the ground and stacked into walls that somehow withstand both sun and storm. And it works mostly, at least when it doesn't rain. Colchani doesn't look like any other town you visited. You walk past a post office made of salt, a cafe with salt chairs and salt counter stools, a workshop where the artisan chips away at a salt llama statue, flicking powdery flakes from a block like he's carving cheese. Even the local church, yes, the church, is crafted from salt, right down to the altar. Step inside, and the air tastes faintly mineral, like a tears and vinegar potato chip. You try not to inhale too deeply. It feels disrespectful somehow. There's something disorienting about a place with no color. The streets are pale. The buildings are pale. The sky is too blue. Shadows are faint and brittle, like they are afraid to commit. You pass a school where children play in the courtyard under harsh midday light, their bright red sweaters practically buzzing against the backdrop. A teacher leans against a salt bench, her sunglasses reflecting the flash of movement from the kids, who, you'll notice, don't seem to blink much. You get the sense they've adapted, like owls or desert lizards. Salt isn't the easiest building material, and yet here it is. The walls are thick, nearly a foot wide, and slightly crumbly if you press too hard. But the craftsmanship is impressive. Blocks are cut in uniform shapes, their edges snug enough that you'd assume mortar was used. But it's not. Just salt. Stackable, stable, and surprisingly cozy. Unless it rains. Which brings us to a fun little detail. The buildings are technically dissolvable. If the heavens open up for too long, things get slushy. Locals have learned to protect their homes with clever workarounds. Plastic sheeting, sloped roofs, drainage ditches. But you still see the scars. That shed over there? It's half melted on one side, like a popsicle that gave up halfway through summer. Over time, some houses have grown rounded, softened by years of drizzle. Others have eroded so gently that their walls look like ancient sand castles, the kind you poke once, and they slump with a sigh. Scientists still argue about how sustainable salt construction really is. Some hail it as a genius adaptation to the local environment. Cheap, abundant, naturally insulating. Others say it's a fragile novelty, destined to vanish with the next big weather shift. But here in Colchani, nobody has time for that debate. They just keep building, carving, replacing. It's a bit like living in a house of snow. You know it won't last forever, but for now, it's home. The village itself is small. A few hundred people live here year-round, mostly Quechua and Aymara families. Many work in the salt fields, harvesting slabs by hand the way their grandparents did. Others operate tiny workshops, where they shape salt blocks into souvenirs. Lamps, clocks, tiny llamas that always seem to be smiling. You'll pass a vendor roasting corn over a rusted propane tank, her stall shaded by a fraying parasol tied to a salt post. You buy a handful of choclo, still warm, and settle onto a crunchy bench. It's like sitting on a hardened breadstick. But it'll do. Colchani isn't a polished destination. It's dusty, cracked, raw, and yet it draws people in. Travelers hungry for surreal experiences, photographers in search of alien landscapes, couples in matching puffer jackets who swear this is the most romantic place they've ever seen. You watch as a group poses beside a salt cactus sculpture, laughing as the wind kicks up their scarves and a few rogue grains stick to their chapstick gloss smiles. The most curious visitors, though, are the ones who go silent. They stare, they listen, they notice the odd stillness, the way sound doesn't carry the same here. Salt is strangely sound absorbent. There's no echo when you speak, no bounce when you clap. It's like the world swallowed its own voice and left you standing in the hush. Some buildings are more elaborate than others. You pass one with decorative carvings etched directly into its walls, geometric spirals, condor wings, mountain silhouettes. It's both crude and beautiful, like someone taught ancient runes to a chalk artist. You run your fingers along a pattern and feel the fine grit come off onto your skin. For a moment, you wonder, does that count as vandalism? Should you apologize to the wall? Inside another building, you find a communal room, long salt benches covered in thick wool blankets. A pot of coca tea steams on a salt shelf near the window. The air is warmer here, slightly humid from the tea. A woman with copper earrings and windburned cheeks gestures for you to sit. You do, brushing the salt dust from the blanket as politely as you can. She pours a cup and hands it to you with a small nod. The tea smells sharp and earthy. You sip. It's like drinking the memory of a plant. Bitter, but not unkind. Quirky detail time. Colchani's salt bricks have been known to sweat during sudden temperature shifts. In the early morning, when the sun hits cold buildings, you can sometimes see faint droplets beat along the walls. Little tears of moisture pulled from nowhere. Locals joke that the town cries at dawn. Some even swear the salt houses absorb stories and weep them out in the light. Sounds like nonsense until you see it for yourself. Then it's just haunting enough to believe. Before you leave the communal room, you notice a bulletin board nailed into a salt slab. Flyers for local festivals, hand-drawn announcements for bus departures, a child's drawing of a sun with a huge smile and Salar written in crooked letters beneath it. The staples rust quickly here, and the paper curls from the dryness. But still, it clings. Life clings. You step back into the blazing light, the town now humming faintly with mid-afternoon activity. Children chasing dogs, vendors shouting softly, a distant whir from a salt grinder in motion. You squint into the horizon and think, this place shouldn't exist. Not here, not like this. But it does, somehow. And it's not even the weirdest building around. You pause now at the edge of town, where the salt flats begin again. Smooth, endless, unsettling in their purity. But to understand why Colchani exists in the first place, you have to rewind, way back, like prehistoric back. Picture this entire landscape not as a solid crust of white, but as a glittering inland sea the size of a small country. Welcome to ancient Lake Minchin. Some 40,000 years ago, this high Bolivian plateau was submerged beneath a vast body of water that stretched across what are now several modern-day salt flats, including Salar de Coipasa, and of course, Salar de Uyuni. Think turquoise waves lapping at volcanic slopes, flamingos skimming across the water, and, this is important, zero beachfront property agents. Eventually, the climate shifted. The lake dried. Over thousands of years, wind and sun baked the minerals into a crust thick enough to walk on. What's left is a landscape that looks like Earth, paused mid-evaporation. Geologists adore this place. They come here like kids at a mineral buffet. The salt flat itself is made of a rigid crust with a hexagonal pattern that forms naturally as the salty brine below cools and contracts. If you've ever seen a turtle shell up close, or the cracked surface of overcooked creme brulee, it's kind of like that, only giant and absolutely everywhere. Scientists still argue over exactly how the ancient lake disappeared. Was it gradual retreat over millennia, or a sudden climatic snap? Some propose a link to the rise of the Andean mountain range, which rerouted water flow and exposed the flats to the sun's unrelenting thirst. Others suggest a series of volcanic eruptions that tipped the ecosystem into a drying spiral. But what everyone agrees on is that this place, bleached, high, and strange, is a product of deep, violent time. Time that melted, baked, and flattened nature into a salt crust wide enough to be visible from space. Colchani was born from that white inheritance, long before the tourist buses arrived and Instagram discovered mirror selfies. Indigenous communities were already harvesting the flats. The Uru Chipaya people, among others, mined salt here in blocks and flakes. carrying them to barter for maize, potatoes, and coca in the valleys below. They called this land Kulki Kuta, or Silver Lake, not because of actual silver, but because of the way the salt shimmered like precious metal in the morning light. You crouch now at the edge of the flats and brush your fingers over the ground. It's warm. You expected cold, but no. It holds the sun like memory. The salt is firm and gritty, layered like stone, but strangely brittle. Beneath the surface, there's a briny soup of lithium-rich waters that's become the obsession of more recent explorers. But we'll get to that. For now, imagine being one of those early salt harvesters. There's no shade, no roads, just you, a hand-carved shovel, and the glint of salt as far as the eye can see. You'd mark your path by familiar volcano peaks, Tahua, Tunupa, Olaga, those silent giants that look like someone spilled rust across the sky. You'd follow the lines in the salt, slice slabs with rhythmic precision, and carry them home on llama back. Repeat that a few hundred times. And congratulations, you've just built the foundation of Kolchani. In fact, the first permanent buildings here were storage huts, just simple structures to keep harvested salt dry and ready for trade. Over time, as mining intensified, families started to settle. A few tents, then a few huts. Then someone had the bright idea to build directly from the salt blocks themselves. It made sense. There was no wood. Clay was scarce, but salt was everywhere, like a bad ex. It was just there. And yes, early mistakes were made. A few enthusiastic builders learned the hard way that rain melts your living room. But over generations, techniques improved. The right cuts, the right density, the right seasons. Walls were stacked, protected, replaced. Salt began to feel less like a resource and more like a co-worker, unpredictable, indispensable, and always slightly annoying. Quirky tidbit: early travelers to this region often mistook the salt flats for snow. Several 19th century expedition journals describe entering the high snows of the Bolivian plateau, only to later realize they'd been trudging through crunchy salt, wondering why their shoes weren't wet and the air tasted like soup stock. One particularly unlucky French botanist apparently licked a handful, thinking it was powdered snow. He reportedly did not enjoy the experience. You pass a faded sign that marks the original edge of the ancient lake. There's no fence, no monument, just a painted salt block half sunk in the ground, with letters bleached nearly invisible. But it marks something real, a transition point between prehistoric sea and modern crust. Stand there too long, and your mind drifts. You imagine the waves lapping against this very spot, fish darting through what's now dry air, flamingos landing with wet splashes. It's hard to picture water here now. Everything feels fossilized in brightness. You return to town just as a small truck rattles past, kicking up a glittering cloud of salt dust. It honks twice, short and casual, and a couple of kids wave. Their mother sits nearby, chipping chunks from a large salt slab, her hands moving with the quiet rhythm of someone who's done this thousands of times. You watch her for a moment, hypnotized. Slice, turn, chip, tap. She's not building anything in particular, just reshaping the raw into the usable. Like the town has always done. It strikes you then. Kolchani wasn't built on the salt flats. It was built from them. Every block, every wall, every tired-looking bench you've passed is a sliver of that ancient sea, pressed and sun-cured into permanence. There's poetry in that. Salt is a preservative, after all. And here, in this high white town, it has preserved more than fish or flesh. It's preserved an entire way of life. You're standing outside a small shed now. It doesn't look like much, just a squat box with a corrugated metal roof and a single door hanging slightly askew. But this is where the magic happens. This is where salt becomes architecture. You duck inside, and the air changes. Cooler, dimmer, and faintly spicy, like earth and iron. There's a man inside, bent over a low table, slowly slicing thick salt slabs into uniform bricks. His name is Elias, and he's been doing this for 37 years. The work is quiet, meditative. Each slab is carved from the flats with a long, serrated blade, then hauled to town, dried in the sun, and cut again by hand. No machines here, just a rhythm passed down like a family recipe. You watch Elias press his chisel into the grain. Tap, shift, tap, rotate. The brick breaks free with a clean sigh. He nods to you, smiles without speaking, and sets the block aside. It looks like a chalky, oversized sugar cube. You kind of want to bite it, you don't. Salt, as it turns out, makes a surprisingly reliable building material, at least in the Altiplano's bone-dry climate. Each brick is stacked tightly against the next without mortar, their flat sides locking into place like Lego. They're heavy but manageable. A single person can carry 2 at a time, maybe 3 if you don't care about your spine. Once in place, the bricks are fused by wetting the edges slightly and allowing them to dry together in the sun. Think of it as cement's lo-fi, crunchy cousin. Scientists still argue about the long-term durability of these structures. Some say they'll last decades if kept dry. Others point to the inevitable crumbling, the way salt attracts moisture over time, even from the air, and weakens itself from within. But the people of Colchani aren't debating. They're building, always building. When a wall weakens, they replace it. When a roof sags, they prop it. It's not permanence they're after, it's continuity. You stroll past several buildings in various stages of reconstruction. One wall leans like it had a little too much chicha last night. Another is perfectly square, its edges aligned like something out of a minimalist architect's dream. Each block bears the soft, cloudy texture of sun-dried salt. Some have streaks of gray or pink, traces of minerals and impurities caught in the freeze-dry history of this land. A few have names scratched into them. Tomas 2004, Lupita, El Puma, little graffiti tags from the builders. Their way of saying, I was here, I stacked this. Salt brickmaking has its rituals. Only certain times of day are best for cutting. The early morning, before the sun softens the slabs. Rainy season is a no-go. Bricks won't dry properly, and every household seems to have its own preferred salt flat section for harvesting. Passed down through generations like real estate, though there are no deeds or fences. Just an unspoken understanding. This patch is yours, that one's mine, and we don't mess with each other's crust. Quirky detail. The salt used for bricks isn't the same as the salt used for eating. That stuff is processed, purified, often iodized. Building salt is raw. It still holds traces of gypsum, dust, even ancient plankton fossils, if you look closely enough. One local artist once swore he found a prehistoric shrimp skeleton inside a wall block. He mounted it in a frame and titled the piece, Lunch, 27,000 BC. It didn't sell, but it did get a write-up in a Bolivian travel blog. You pass a family stacking bricks for a new workshop. A boy no older than 12 lifts one with a quiet grunt and hands it to his father, who places it into the growing wall. The mother smooths the joint with a flat stone, then sprinkles a few drops of brine along the seam to seal it. It's not fast work, but it's steady. There's no yelling, no rush. The wall will be ready when it's ready. As you continue walking, your feet crunch softly on the salt-dusted ground. Even the dirt here is pale. In places, it sparkles faintly in the sun, like someone spilled sugar across the earth. You pass a building whose entire front is tiled in salt mosaics, geometric shapes, suns, llamas, condors. It's dazzling in the light, and somehow both elegant and absurd. You love it. Then there's the issue of furniture. Beds, salt blocks, tables, salt slabs, shelves, salt planks. One cafe even offers salt stools, basically chunky cubes that double as conversation pieces and lower back warnings. Sitting on one is like perching on a block of frozen lasagna. Charming, but your spine will file a complaint. Most indoor salt pieces are covered with thick textiles, woven wool blankets, colorful aguayos, or layered cushions, not just for comfort, but for preservation. Salt erodes faster when handled. A sweaty palm here, a spilled drink there. It adds up. One cafe owner jokes that if you spill Coca-Cola on the salt table, you have to buy the table. A half joke, mostly. But let's not forget the dangers. Salt is a tyrannical material. It's corrosive. It crumbles under pressure. It seeps into everything. A misplaced leak, a broken pipe, and suddenly your living room is a slushy mess. That's why locals install gutter systems around their roofs, diverting every precious raindrop away from their walls. Some even build raised salt foundations to prevent ground-level moisture from creeping up like a stealthy rot. One man shows you his triple-proofed home. Salt blocks, sealed joints, and an inner plastic liner. He's proud. You nod respectfully, even though his front porch still looks like it might disintegrate in a strong sneeze. Scientists are also exploring whether salt could become a legitimate eco-friendly material in other dry environments. It's abundant, it's recyclable, and it doesn't require industrial processing. But until someone figures out how to make it rainproof, Colchani remains one of the few places in the world where salt is not just a seasoning, but shelter. And yet, despite all its fragility, there's something undeniably solid about the town. Not structurally. Those corners are soft, let's be honest, but emotionally. The people here don't just live on the salt. They understand it. They speak its language. They know when to chip, when to stack, when to replace. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the buildings, but the quiet agreement between human and mineral. I'll shape you. You'll shelter me. For a while. That's enough. There's a moment, somewhere around midday, when the salt glare gets so intense that you start to lose perspective. Shapes flatten, shadows disappear, colors bleach. You pause outside a small shop in Colchani. Rub your eyes and stare at the salt walls. They look appetizing? No. Wait, that can't be right. And yet your brain starts whispering things like marshmallow, vanilla fudge, sugar cube palace. That's when the weirdest urge hits. You want to lick the wall. You won't be the first. Somewhere, deep in the archives of tourist mistakes, sits an entire subgenre dedicated to licking Colchani's architecture. The temptation is real. Everything looks like it belongs on a dessert cart. And one American tourist reportedly swore the corner of her salt hotel room smelled like kettle chips. A French backpacker claimed he could taste the history. A German couple once asked their tour guide if they could season their soup directly from the table. The guide said no, gently but firmly. You walk past a bench made from long salt slabs and see faint tongue marks, little glossy patches where the texture has been worn smooth. It's both funny and deeply concerning. Salt isn't sterile, it's porous. It's full of micro cracks and ancient microbes and occasionally bird footprints. Lick at your own risk. The locals, for their part, are patient about the whole thing. They've seen it all. Some keep signs on their walls that read, in 3 languages, "Please don't lick the building." Others lean into the absurdity. One souvenir shop sells certified salt wall samples for licking at home. Miniature bricks, sealed in plastic, with a cheeky label, Colchani. Taste the walls without the shame. You pick one up. It's $5. You quietly buy 2. Inside the shop, you find salt everything. Tiny chairs, little llamas with expressive faces, salt clocks that don't quite tell the right time. One particularly ambitious piece is a chess set, with each piece hand-carved from a separate grain layer of salt, giving them subtle marbling. The knight looks like a startled alpaca. You love it. You don't buy it, because let's be honest, traveling with salt chess pieces sounds like a logistical nightmare, but you admire the artistry. Behind the counter, an old man named Victor waves you over. His fingernails are lined with white grit, and his smile is one of those slow, practiced ones, like a curtain being drawn back. He tells you he's been carving salt since he was a teenager. "My father taught me," he says, tapping his temple, "but I made it funnier." He shows you his proudest piece, a full model of the Eiffel Tower, built entirely out of interlocked salt sticks. It's 2 feet tall and surprisingly elegant, if slightly lopsided near the top. "It leans," he explains, "just like the real one, but because of humidity, and also because I dropped it once." He laughs. You laugh. The tower stays standing. Victor offers you a chunk of flavored salt to taste. Aniseed, lemon, smoked. You choose lemon. It's weirdly addictive, like salt that dreamed of being candy and gave up halfway. You thank him, wave goodbye, and step back into the glare. You're still thinking about licking the wall. Outside, a small group of tourists cluster near a low building that seems to shimmer faintly. The guide is explaining, in slow Spanish, how the salt bricks must be rotated regularly in some structures, like tiles on a roof. Turns out, if a certain side starts to absorb too much moisture or sun exposure, it can warp or crack. So people literally pull out the bricks, turn them like eggs in a carton, and slot them back in. A process that sounds both deeply annoying and strangely satisfying. Quirky tidbit: some locals claim you can hear when a salt wall is ready for repair. They say the creaking changes pitch, the surface sound gets grainier, almost like sandpaper scraping wood. Scientists, naturally, are skeptical. They attribute it to shifting humidity levels and microstructural stress. But you listen anyway. You press your ear to one of the walls and swear you hear a whisper. Or maybe it's just the wind, flirting. As you wander farther, you pass the Salt School, a small 2-room building painted with murals of smiling suns and bright pink flamingos. The outer walls are salt. The desks inside are salt. Even the chalkboard frame, salt. A teacher sits near the door, preparing a stack of lessons. She waves you in, smiles. You step cautiously onto the crusty floor. The room smells like paper, dust, and faintly of, well, salt. It's comforting in a strange way. You watch as a young boy recites numbers in Spanish. tapping each one into a carved groove on his desk. His hand leaves a trail of pale fingerprints behind. Another student sketches a llama in pencil, his lines firm, deliberate. No erasers here. You don't get second chances when you're drawing on salt. Scientists still argue about the impact of salt air on long-term cognitive development. Does constant mineral exposure affect attention spans? Memory? Some studies hint at elevated stress in high saline environments, but nothing's conclusive. Still, you wonder, what's it like growing up where your school desk could technically season your lunch? As you leave the school, you spot a handmade sign on the wall. La sal es nuestra madre. Salt is our mother. It's a poetic truth around here. Salt feeds them, shelters them, supports their art and education. You can't escape it, and no one tries to. Further down the road, you come across a salt bar. Yes, a bar. It's not a big operation, just a counter made of stacked blocks, a few cracked stools, and a cooler that somehow stays cold. They serve tiny bottles of beer and salty snacks, mostly fried plantains and something crunchy made from dried quinoa. You sit down, order a cold one, and lean against the bar. Yep, salt. Of course. A man beside you toasts with his bottle. You like our buildings? He asks in English. You nod. Strangest place you've been? You think for a second. Top 3, you reply. He grins. Don't worry. Tomorrow it gets weirder. You believe him. And as you take another sip, you catch yourself glancing at the bar's surface again. That same whisper in your brain. Just a quick lick. Just one tiny no. Resist. Colchani has many things to offer, but dignity is not licking the furniture. You wake up in a room where even the bed is made of salt. Not just the headboard or the floor tiles, the entire thing. Slabs of crystallized salt form the base, the legs, the frame. It's shockingly sturdy and weirdly beautiful in the morning light. There's a mattress, of course, soft and thick, laid over the mineral plinth like frosting on a very crunchy cake. But it's clear that this is no ordinary hotel room. Welcome to Palacio de Sal, the world's first salt hotel. It's perched just outside Colchani, gleaming like a low, white spaceship, parked at the edge of the endless flats. From a distance, it seems to shimmer with unreality. Up close, you can see the detail. The hand-carved walls, the blocky salt furniture, the faint layer of dust that sparkles whenever someone walks by. This isn't your typical tourist trap. It's part art piece, part experiment, part survival tactic. And the moment you check in, you realize 2 things. 1, you're constantly thirsty. 2, you really shouldn't touch your face after leaning on the nightstand. The lobby is cool and quiet. White floors, white benches, white ceilings. A few decorations add color. A red woven blanket, a cactus sculpture, a llama painting with suspiciously human eyebrows. The reception desk is carved from, you guessed it, salt. There's a small sign taped to the front that reads, "Please don't lick the counter. We've counted." The staff don't even joke about it anymore. They've seen too much. Your room feels surreal. Every surface is clean, minimal, and glowing slightly in the diffuse morning light. The walls are thick and textured, like giant sugar cubes pressed together by some ancient pastry god. There's no musty hotel smell, just dryness, infinite, unsparing dryness. Your skin feels tighter, just standing there. Your lips, already betraying you. Lip balm will become your best friend in this place. You wander into the ensuite bathroom and pause. The toilet is ceramic, thankfully. Even Colchani has limits. But the mirror frame, salt. The soap dish, salt. The towel rack, salt. It's as if someone gave a spa designer free rein in a very specific mineral obsession. Scientists still argue whether sleeping surrounded by salt has measurable effects on the body. Some studies suggest improved respiratory function, particularly for those with asthma or allergies. Others insist it's all placebo. Your lungs might feel clearer simply because the air is so dry, so pure, so unbothered by mold or pollen. Either way, you slept like a rock. A slightly dehydrated, mineral-cuddled rock. Down in the breakfast area, other guests sip coca tea and spoon quinoa porridge from salt-edged bowls. There's a quiet reverence to the space. Conversations are hushed. Movements are slow. Not because it's early, but because everyone's a little in awe. One couple murmurs about how they didn't believe the place was really made of salt until they poked the ceiling. Another admits they tried a cautious lick during the night. No judgment. It happens. The Palacio was built in the 1990s, a bold concept by a Bolivian architect who decided, accurately, that if the town was going to thrive, it needed something truly unique. Something absurd enough to attract curiosity, but practical enough to survive. And here it is, still standing, after decades of wind tourists and confused TripAdvisor reviews. Maintenance is constant. The staff regularly replace bricks that begin to erode. Rooms are closed seasonally to allow for repairs. And because salt naturally absorbs moisture and odors, there's a strict rule against, let's say, excessive wetness. That means no showers longer than 5 minutes, no wet swimsuits, and absolutely no water balloons. Yes, that rule is written on the brochure. And yes, someone obviously tried. Quirky tidbit. The salt chandelier in the main hall? It's wired with LED bulbs to prevent heat damage, and the salt is treated with a mysterious anti-drip coating that only the head maintenance worker knows how to apply. He refuses to tell anyone the formula. Says it's a secret between man and salt. You decide not to pry. After breakfast, you take a guided tour of the hotel's museum wing. Inside are salt sculptures of local wildlife, flamingos, vicuñas, foxes, each one carved with delicate precision. There's also a timeline of Colchani's history, illustrated with tiny salt buildings mounted on display stands. The guide, a woman in a red poncho with a laugh like gravel, points out a replica of the original salt hut, where the hotel founder lived during construction. No windows, she says, but excellent seasoning. As you walk through the halls, you notice how quiet it is. Sound seems to sink into the salt. Your footsteps don't echo. Voices fade quickly. It's oddly peaceful. A perfect place for sleep, actually. Which explains why more than one guest has reported dreams they describe as foggy, floating, or very, very salty. One man apparently dreamt he was a salt shaker rolling across the flat. He woke up crying and couldn't explain why. Outside, the sun is already high, and the salt flats are glowing like polished marble. The hotel offers boots for walking the flats, a necessity since the crust can slice through regular shoes like stale toast. You take a pair and step beyond the hotel grounds. The building behind you looks like a snow fort left over from childhood. Ahead of you, infinity. You find yourself wondering, how does something like this exist? Not just the hotel, but the whole town. It's like someone dared the universe to make a habitable place out of table seasoning. And yet, here you are, hydrated mostly, rested, slightly, stunned, completely. Salt. The stuff you brush off your fries. The thing you pretend to use sparingly. Here, it holds up roofs, frames windows, catches dreams, traps voices. In Kolchani, salt isn't just a mineral, it's the medium of memory. And as the hotel fades behind you and the flats stretch forward in ghostly silence, you realize this isn't some novelty resort. It's a palace built from persistence. You step farther out now, beyond the Salt Hotel and the village edge, and something peculiar starts happening. You check your watch. It says 10:41 a.m. The sun is clearly high, almost directly overhead. But then, an hour later, it seems like nothing's changed. The shadows haven't moved. The light hasn't softened. Time seems frozen, like someone forgot to advance the reel. Welcome to one of the strangest effects of Kolchani's geography. The way salt, sky, and altitude distort your sense of time. It's not a trick of your watch. The hours do pass. You eat lunch. The wind shifts. But everything in between feels like it stretches. Minutes swell into moments. Moments into long, reflective silences. It's the light, mostly. The glaring white salt reflects the sun like a mirror. Not just beneath you, but around you, bouncing photons in all directions. There are no long shadows to mark the passage of time. No trees for sunbeams to crawl across. No visual clues to anchor your sense of now. Scientists still argue over why the human brain struggles to measure time in hyper-reflective environments. Some believe the absence of contrast confuses our circadian rhythms. Others blame the elevation, the lack of oxygen slowing neural processing just enough to make perception feel off. A few fringe researchers even suggest the salt itself affects electromagnetic fields in the body. That last one's probably nonsense. Probably. Still, you walk forward and feel like you've entered a dream loop. Everything's too bright, too slow, too quiet. Even sound acts weird here. Voices seem flatter, thinner. A shout doesn't echo. It just disappears. You test it once, yelling hello into the expanse. Nothing comes back. Just the wind, politely ignoring you. You stop. Close your eyes. And that's when you feel it. The dryness. This is no ordinary air. At over 12,000 feet, the Altiplano's atmosphere is thin, sun-scorched, and almost entirely free of moisture. Blink, and your eyes sting. Breathe through your mouth, and your tongue begins to resemble old carpet. It's like your body is being vacuum sealed by the sky. You take a sip from your water bottle. It's already warm. You take another, then check your watch again. Somehow, it's still 12:04. You mutter something unprintable. The salt absorbs your complaint. Quirky detail. Some travelers report mild hallucinations after several hours on the flats. Nothing wild, no pink elephants or Elvis sightings, but enough to feel unsettling. A shimmer that wasn't there a moment ago. A sound that might have been a whisper. One photographer swore he saw a doorway appear in the salt, just standing upright like it had always been there. He approached it, blinked, and it was gone. You decide it's time to return to Kolchani, if only to rejoin the living and find something with corners. As you near town, the salt blurs again into texture. You start noticing color, shabby blue doors, dusty red ponchos, the faded green of old signage. Time begins to return. A child runs by, trailing a string with a plastic bottle tied to the end. He laughs. You smile. You're back. Inside a small cafe, the clock ticks audibly. A radio murmurs. Someone flips a page in a notebook. The presence of ordinary time feels oddly reassuring, like rediscovering gravity. You order coca tea and sit at a table made of, yes, salt. The steam from your cup curls upward and vanishes. You check your watch. 12:51. You swear it's been at least 2 hours, maybe 3. The tea helps. The cafe owner, a middle-aged woman with sharp cheekbones and soft eyes, notices your dazed look and chuckles. The salt, she says in Spanish. She slows you down. Then, almost as an afterthought, but not enough to make lunch arrive early, you both laugh. You hadn't realized how much you needed to. You sip the tea slowly. The flavors are earthy, bitter, and grounding. Around you, locals chat in low tones. A dusty breeze lifts the corner of a tablecloth. The moment stretches, then slips past. This time, gently. Later, you take a walk near the cemetery on the edge of town. The graves are marked with salt headstones, some rough, others carved with care. A few have umbrellas jammed into the ground for shade. Plastic flowers have faded into pastel ghosts. The sky above is blisteringly blue, too perfect to be real. You stand in silence, the graves lined like bricks of memory, and time again begins to wobble. You feel a soft sadness you can't explain. Scientists still debate how places like this, high, dry, blazing with light, affect human mood. Some argue that the reduced oxygen lowers serotonin levels. Others believe the raw exposure to sky and silence prompts a kind of involuntary introspection. One researcher called the flats an accidental monastery. You can see what he meant. As you walk back, a small bell rings from a church tower. One short chime to mark the hour. You check your watch again. 3 o'clock. Maybe. Finally. The sun hasn't moved much, but something inside you has. You're no longer surprised by the delay. You've adjusted. Time bends here, like light. You don't resist it anymore. Back at your hotel, you stand at the window. The salt flats shimmer, blurring horizon and sky. You realize that day and night are looser concepts in Colchini, more like suggestions. Without foliage, color, or shadow, your body can't rely on the usual cues. Instead, it learns a new rhythm, measured in quiet breaths, creaking walls, distant voices, and the glint of salt at every hour. Time here isn't told, it's felt, and right now, it's time to rest. The next morning begins before the sun fully rises. You're bundled in layers, hat, gloves, scarf, even sunglasses, despite the hour. Because today, you're heading out to witness something ancient, meticulous, and oddly graceful. The dawn harvest of salt. You follow a narrow dirt path out of Colchani, your boots crunching over packed crust, and the occasional rogue shard of salt. In the half-light, the flats look soft and gray, like a frozen lake in a dream. But as the sun begins to push upward, the surface hardens. Visually, emotionally, existentially. This isn't ice. This is fossilized water. Time, flattened and salted. Up ahead, a group of men moves in synchrony. There's no shouting, no honking trucks or diesel fumes. Just the sound of wood scraping crust, the chuff of a shovel biting in, and the low murmurs of men who know exactly what comes next. You've arrived at the daily ballet of the salt miners. Each man wears long sleeves, wool caps, and mirrored sunglasses that reflect the infinite white. They stand in shallow pools, small excavated patches where the top layer of salt has been chipped away, revealing the moist brine underneath. They work barefoot, ankles whitening with contact. One of them flashes a quick smile and nods. It's not a show. It's a rhythm. First, they mark the harvest zones with long wooden stakes, gridding the flats like a game board. Then, using long, flat shovels, they break the salt into slabs, perfect rectangles about the size of pizza boxes and twice as dense. The sound is hypnotic. Crack, slide, lift, stack. A dance performed daily for generations. You don't speak, you just watch. Scientists still argue about how this traditional method compares in efficiency to industrial salt extraction. Big machines are faster, sure, but they churn the landscape, destroy the natural crust, and require massive fuel inputs. These men, they extract what they need, seasonally, precisely, and with almost zero waste. Some call it primitive. Others call it brilliant. You'd call it beautiful. A young man, maybe 20, loads freshly cut slabs onto a sled. Not a truck, not a cart, a sled, pulled by hand across the salt. It's easier than wheeling, they say, less friction. And the sled glides, ghost-like, behind him, trailing glistening white shards like broken moonlight. Nearby, a woman prepares lunch beneath a canvas canopy held down with stones. She boils potatoes over a small fire and pours hot tea into a plastic thermos. A toddler peeks out from a woven blanket tied to her back. You smile. The kid blinks at you like an owl and ducks out of sight. The sun is higher now, and the light turns brutal. You slip on your sunglasses, but the miners work on, unfazed. They've done this since they could walk. One man tells you he started harvesting at age 6. Before I knew my letters, he laughs, I knew how to split salt. They stack the slabs in neat pyramids to dry, little white temples rising from the flats. Some are taller than you. Each one will shrink slightly as moisture evaporates, tightening the grain and preparing the blocks for transport. Later, they'll be hauled to Colchani's processing centers, where they'll be ground, bagged, or carved into sculptures. Some will become buildings. Others, shakers in Parisian kitchens. Salt gets around. Quirky tidbit, the miners' tools, shovels, sleds, and chippers are all handmade. There's a specific kind of local wood, hard and slightly flexible, that works best for handles. Metal blades are often recycled from old truck parts. One man proudly shows you his blade. Used to be the side panel of a Toyota. You nod. Still runs better than most Toyotas, he jokes. The heat creeps in fast. By midday, the salt flashes with so much light it's like walking across a fluorescent tube. The miners retreat to a canvas shade to rest, drink tea, and swap stories. You sit with them, no phones, no watches, just mugs passed around, steam curling up into the white sky. You feel your heartbeat slow, not from exhaustion, but from a strange, borrowed calm. You ask one of them, an older man with a weathered face and sun-bleached eyebrows, what it's like to work the same land every day for 40 years. He shrugs. The salt changes, he says. She remembers everything, but she never stays the same. You're not sure what that means. You don't ask. You just file it away in your brain under poetic mysteries. Back in town, you pass one of the salt workshops and notice how similar the rhythm is. The carving, the stacking, the quiet focus. Whether it's mining or sculpting, the pattern holds. Salt doesn't like to be rushed. Push it too fast and it crumbles. But if you move at its pace, it bends. Just a little. Scientists have observed that the crust of Salar de Uyuni regrows slowly, less than a centimeter per year in most places, meaning every slab cut from the surface is a slice of time itself. Time compacted, time solidified. And when these men pull it up, shape it, and send it into the world, they're not just harvesting salt, they're releasing history. As you leave the flats, the sun dips slightly and shadows return, soft-edged, but finally there. You didn't notice their absence until now. Strange how much you miss something once it comes back. Back in your room, you brush salt dust from your boots and lie on the bed made of blocks. You close your eyes. And even though your legs ache and your face feels scorched, you're smiling. You saw the ballet of the salt, and you'll never forget the quiet choreography of men who move like memory across the flats. The next morning, you set out to explore something a little less graceful and a lot more rusty. The train graveyard. Locals call it the Cementerio de Trenes, and it sits just outside Uyuni, Colchani's larger, dustier cousin to the south. You hop into a creaky pickup with a friendly driver named Raul, who smiles like a man who's seen every possible tourist reaction. "You'll like this," he says. "It's romantic, if you like decay." After 20 minutes of bumpy salt flat driving and Raul's impressive playlist of Bolivian 80s hits, you arrive. And there it is. A sprawling field of broken iron skeletons, scattered like the aftermath of a long-forgotten robot war. Rows of locomotives, some gutted, others tilted, all hollowed out, sit in permanent retirement. The paint has long since vanished, leaving orange-brown flakes, soot stains, and streaks of corrosion. Metal peels like sunburnt skin. Steel wheels lie half buried in dust. Graffiti covers every inch. Hearts, initials, peace signs, profanities in 3 languages. But despite the damage, there's a strange elegance here. The trains are frozen in place like oversized museum pieces. Some lean into each other like old men at a bus stop, murmuring over lost time. Others stretch across the cracked earth like sleeping serpents. You walk between them slowly, boots thudding on rusted panels, each step echoing in a way salt never allowed. Scientists still argue about what should be done with the train graveyard. Some say it's a valuable industrial relic, a chance to preserve early South American rail history. Others call it a rusting eyesore and argue it should be dismantled and recycled. But for now, it remains a monument to ambition, failure, and the haunting charm of mechanical ruins. You run your hand along the side of an old boiler and feel the heat of the sun trapped in the iron. The metal is rough. Your fingers come away dusty. The plaque nearby reads, Ferrocarril de Antofagasta, a Bolivia, 1911. This was once a main line, part of a grand plan to connect Bolivia to the Pacific coast. Back in the 19th century, Bolivia's leaders dreamed of transforming the salt flats into an economic powerhouse. Trains were supposed to link the salt mines with ports and refineries. British engineers were brought in. Rails were laid. Engines imported. For a brief moment, Uyuni and Colchani buzzed with activity. Steam, coal, salt, and dreams. But the dream cracked. War came, borders shifted, mining operations stalled, the world moved on, and the trains, they stayed, abandoned, too expensive to move, too big to hide, so they sat and rusted and slowly became beautiful again. You climb inside the cab of one of the engines. The levers are frozen, the windows shattered. There's graffiti on the ceiling that reads, "No gods, no Wi-Fi, only salt." You sit on the edge, legs dangling, and watch as another tourist tries to take a dramatic selfie on the roof of a carriage. He slips, laughs, dusts himself off. Raul chuckles from the truck. Every day someone falls, he says. No one ever learns. Nearby, a local couple sells snacks from a shaded stall. You buy a cold bottle of maracuya juice and a bag of salted maize. The juice is sweet and sharp, the maize tooth-breakingly crunchy. You chew slowly, listening to the wind whistle through the hollow train pipes. It sounds like a flute with laryngitis. Quirky tidbit. One of the train cars has been converted unofficially into a love shrine. Inside, people leave offerings. Flowers, notes, even tiny salt figurines shaped like hearts. One note reads in loopy Spanish handwriting, "I met you here. We rusted together." You smile. That's either incredibly sweet or deeply codependent. Possibly both. As you walk the perimeter, you spot other fragments, half-buried tracks, bent wheels, rusted shovels, forgotten wrenches, tools of progress turned into salt-covered fossils. There's something deeply human about it all. This urge to build, to conquer, to connect, and then to forget. Some tourists see this place as pure Instagram fodder. Others, like you, feel something heavier, a quiet hum of loss. The knowledge that technology ages faster than we do, that steel has its own lifespan, and that even the grandest ambitions can be reduced to photo ops and flaking paint. Scientists occasionally use the train graveyard as a teaching tool, showing how desert conditions affect corrosion, how salt air accelerates decay, how abandoned systems collapse over time. But no model can really explain the feeling of standing inside a broken machine that once breathed fire and now sleeps in dust. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the train alive again, coal-stoked, whistles shrieking, wheels screeching to life as steam curls skyward. You imagine passengers loading crates of salt, workers shouting it over the roar, engineers checking gauges with blackened hands. Then, silence. The machine exhales one last puff and dies again. When you open your eyes, a gust of wind lifts a swirl of sand and salt dust. It coats the wreckage like icing sugar. You realize that even in decay, these machines are part of the landscape now, slowly becoming the desert they tried to conquer. Back in Colchani, the salt walls stand firm. The miners work the flats. The artists carve their llamas. But the train graveyard remains a reminder of how progress arrives loud but leaves quiet, of how even iron gives in eventually. As the sun sets behind a haze of high-altitude clouds, the train graveyard turns gold, then bronze, then nearly black against the glowing horizon. And in that light, it doesn't look ruined. It looks dignified. By now, you've seen the salt walls. You've slept in a salt bed, walked across salt plains, and even had a casual stare down with a rusted-out train. You've felt the air dry your bones, watched time lose its grip, and maybe, just maybe, you've licked something you shouldn't have. But tonight, as you walk toward the edges of Colchani beneath the fading sun, you're here for something different. The stories, the myths, the ghosts. Colchani isn't a loud town, but it has a memory, an oral history preserved not in books, but in breath. Elders here speak slowly, with gaps, pauses where facts fade into superstition and then curl back into something true. And one of the most enduring tales passed from porch to porch, fire pit to fire pit, is this: not everything buried in the salt stays buried. It starts with the travelers. They were always foreigners, traders, conquistadors, even bandits. drawn to the salt flats long before GPS or tour guides or neatly laminated maps. The flats stretched endless, unmarked, blinding. Many believed they could cross. Some vanished. One story tells of a Spanish cartographer who attempted to map the Salar in the 1700s. He carried a compass, a notebook, 2 donkeys, and way too much confidence. After his 3rd day on the flats, he stopped sending smoke signals. Locals found his cart weeks later, upturned, sun-bleached, and still full of ink bottles. But no sign of the man. Some say he wandered too far, chasing the reflection of mountains. Others whisper he found a patch of soft salt and sank slowly, quietly, into the brine beneath. Scientists still argue whether the salt flats are entirely solid. Most areas have a crust thick enough to support trucks, even tour buses. But underneath, brine pools, thin patches, pockets of air, the occasional bubbling spot where the earth still mutters. Geologists have mapped most of them. Most. There's also the tale of the mummy that wouldn't dry. You hear it from Raul, your driver from the train graveyard, who finds you later that evening outside a street food stall eating llama empanadas. He leans against the post, peels back the foil on his sandwich, and nods. Want to hear something weird? You do. He tells you about the body found back in the 90s during an attempt to lay new pipeline out by the flats. The crew hit something hard. First thought it was a buried salt boulder, but it turned out to be human, preserved. Clothes still intact, skin leathery but whole, boots laced, a hat still on his head. The odd part, he hadn't desiccated at all. Now, in this climate, dry, arid, sun-drenched, everything dries out. Meat, leather, fruit, skin. But this man had moisture, as if something underneath was keeping him. The forensic team took him to La Paz. The report vanished. No cause of death released. A few months later, the dig project was abandoned. Cursed, Raul says, biting his sandwich. Or maybe just wet in the wrong place. You try to laugh, then realize he's not really joking. Another legend floats around town like a loose kite. The White Lady of the Flats. Descriptions vary. Some say she wears a shawl of salt crystals. Others claim she rides a skeletal llama. Always seen at twilight, always silent. No one's sure what she wants. Some say she's looking for her husband. Others say she is the salt, walking for the sake of motion. You hear a variation from a salt sculptor who's polishing a flamingo made from a single curved block. He tells you his grandfather once saw her out past Isla Incahuasi, way into the flats, long after the safe zone. She walked barefoot across the crust, never looked down, never left tracks. The old man turned around and didn't return to the flats for 10 years. Quirky tidbit. At least one tour company has tried to monetize the ghost stories. Salar Spirit Tours, their brochure reads, with the tagline, "Whispers in the White." It's mostly harmless, mostly theatrical, but one guide quit mid-shift after guests reported seeing a woman in white standing in their mirror inside their salt hotel room. But not every legend is tragic. Some are just strange. There's the treasure tale. Back in the 1800s, a small-time colonial tax officer went rogue, absconding with a load of silver coins intended for Spanish payrolls. Instead of heading for the border, he fled into the flats. Legend says he buried the coins beneath a marker made of, what else? Salt. But the marker dissolved. The spot was lost. And the treasure? still somewhere beneath your feet. Scientists have actually confirmed that some mineral signatures in the area do indicate traces of precious metals. But between the reflectivity, the shifting crust, and the complete lack of landmarks, your odds of finding it are approximately zero. Still, some locals walk the flats with dowsing rods. Old habits die salty. Later that night, you walk outside your hotel and stare across the moonlit flats. There's no breeze, no cars, just silence and shimmer. The salt reflects the starlight like a broken mirror, scattered and perfect. It feels too quiet, too still. You remember Raoul's story. You glance sideways, half expecting to see someone, something, standing just past the edge of your vision. But there's nothing. Just moon, salt, and the sound of your heartbeat. Back inside, you close your door gently. Lay down on your salt bed. And as your eyes begin to close, you find yourself wondering, not in fear, but in curiosity. How many stories are still buried out there? How many never left? The next morning, you're still thinking about the white lady of the flats as you wander outside, bleary-eyed and sun-drenched, towards something that couldn't feel more different, a bright pink lake. Yes, pink. You didn't expect it. The guidebook barely mentioned it. But there it is, a shallow, iridescent lagoon just beyond the salt flat's edge, rippling softly under a sky so blue it looks filtered. And the water? It's not a trick of the light. It's genuinely bubblegum pink, like someone drained a warehouse of strawberry milkshake concentrate into the basin and said, "Yeah, this is fine." Welcome to Laguna Colorada, or one of its lesser-known cousins, saltwater lakes with high salinity, rich in red algae, and spectacularly unapologetic about their aesthetic choices. You step closer, careful not to disturb the crusty shore. The ground crackles beneath your boots, and tiny salt crystals pop loose like popcorn. A flock of flamingos skims across the far end of the lake. Not photoshopped, not staged, just casually living in Barbie's spa day. They eat the same algae that give the lake its color, which also turns their feathers pink. Nature's matching set. Scientists still argue over how these lakes regulate their hue. Some say it's purely algae. Others point to mineral reactions, iron oxide, lithium residues, even bacterial blooms. The reality? Probably a shimmering cocktail of all the above. No one's bottled it yet, which is probably for the best. You imagine it smells like a seafood smoothie left out in the sun. And speaking of lithium, as you stand near the edge, the breeze kicks up a briny scent, and your guide, a woman in mirrored glasses and a windbreaker that looks older than you, points toward a distant industrial site. That, she says, is where the future's being mined. Because beneath all this beauty, all this salt and algae and prehistoric weirdness, lies a substance your smartphone would probably kill for: lithium. Colchani and the wider Salar de Uyuni region sit atop the world's largest known lithium reserves. This ghost-white expanse isn't just scenic, it's strategic. The lithium brine, trapped beneath the salt crust, holds the key to rechargeable batteries, electric vehicles, energy storage systems. Basically, everything the modern world is quietly panicking about. In recent years, Bolivia has tried to harness this potential. State-run operations, international partnerships, private investors, evaporation pools, giant, shallow rectangles, are now dotted across the flats, slowly drawing out lithium carbonate from the brine. They shimmer in weird colors: teal, magenta, cyan, depending on the minerals at play. From above, they look like pixel art designed by a chemist with a mood board. But it's not without controversy. Locals in Kolchani are torn. On one hand, lithium means jobs, infrastructure, investment. On the other, it risks draining the water tables, altering ecosystems, and threatening the very salt flats that define the region. The salt gives, your guide says, but she doesn't forget. Quirky tidbit. A French tech company once proposed building a solar-powered lithium extraction station that would float across the flats like a massive robotic stingray. It never happened, partially due to engineering problems, mostly due to someone realizing that sticking a giant moving robot on sacred salt land might not be the diplomatic move they thought it was. You visit one of the existing lithium facilities, where brine from beneath the crust is pumped into shallow ponds. The process is slow. Sunlight evaporates the water, leaving mineral residue behind. You're handed a small container with chalky white powder. Future phone batteries, the technician says. You nod. It looks like baking soda. You resist the urge to taste it. Scientists continue to study the sustainability of this process. Is there enough water in the region to support industrial-scale extraction? Can the environment handle the strain? Will the salt flats themselves start to collapse as more brine is drained from below? There are no easy answers, just salt, sunlight, and slow decisions. Later, you return to the pink lake. The flamingos have moved closer. They wade with purpose, heads dipping in and out of the water like bobbing teacups. Their feet disturb the crust, leaving small pockmarks behind. You crouch low, trying to catch the exact shade of the lake's surface. It shifts between coral and neon, depending on the angle. You take a photo. It doesn't do it justice. You think about how this place is so many things at once: a holy site, a mining operation, a natural wonder, a chemical reservoir, a flamingo cafeteria. You feel awe and unease. In town, murals have started appearing. Bright paintings of lithium atoms surrounded by flames, salt bricks crumbling into phone screens, cartoon llamas wearing VR goggles. Satire, prophecy, who knows? But the message is clear. Kolchani is balancing on a mineral knife edge. You sip a cold soda from a plastic bottle and remember what Raoul said about rust and memory. This place has always been about extraction. First salt, now power. But every gain comes with a trade. You finish your drink, crumple the bottle, and hand it to a street vendor who reuses plastic for crafts. Nothing here is wasted. Not salt, not shade, not stories. Everything loops back. As the sun lowers again, long shadows finally crawling across the white. A pink shimmer still glows in the distance. The lake, the lithium, the birds, all still there. Waiting, watching, changing. It's early afternoon in Kolchani, and the sun is flexing. The salt flats behind you blaze like a cosmic flashbang, and the shadows in the village have finally grown long enough to offer some mercy. You duck into a narrow alley between two salt block buildings, and suddenly, everything changes. There's music, not loud, not polished, but steady. A single stringed instrument, maybe a charango, plucks out a slow, looping melody. You follow the sound to an open-air courtyard where the locals have set up shop. And here, far from the ghost stories and lithium politics, you find something quietly dazzling: the salt artisans. They work at folding tables shaded by tarps and wool blankets, surrounded by buckets of salt, carving knives, chisels, and brushes made from repurposed broom bristles. These are the town's creators, the people who take a raw mineral and whisper stories into it, sculpting Colchani's surreal geography into bite-sized, sellable art. One man is carving a llama, long neck, perky ears, tail curled in delight. The salt block in his hands is no bigger than a loaf of bread. With each tap of the chisel, soft white flakes fall like snow into a shallow pan at his feet. You watch for a while, mesmerized by the sound. Chip, chip, breath, chip. The llama starts to smile. Of course it does. Quirky tidbit. A few of the artisan llamas wear tiny sweaters, hand-knit, pocket-sized pullovers, dyed with natural pigments. They don't do anything, but tourists love them. A sweater-wearing salt llama is apparently the highest form of Bolivian fridge magnet. Nearby, a woman is polishing a set of salt coasters. She holds them up to the light, checking for streaks or cracks. They're stunning, marbled with mineral veins and soft grays and pale browns. You pick one up. It's cool to the touch, faintly gritty, and smells like nothing, which is kind of refreshing in a world full of lavender-scented nonsense. You ask her how long it takes to make a set. Depends, she shrugs. If the salt behaves. You nod like you understand. You don't. She smiles anyway. Scientists still debate whether these salt-based arts can survive the pressures of modern tourism and industrial development. The market is fragile. Mass production tempts the next generation. Some artisans now buy pre-cut blanks from outside towns, skipping the carving altogether. But here in Colchani, tradition still has bite. The locals talk about reading the salt, feeling its texture, listening for resistance, sensing where it wants to be shaped. The salt speaks, they say. You just have to know how to listen. You continue walking through the open market. One table sells crystallized salt lamps shaped like volcanoes. Another displays chess sets with condors and miners as the king and queen. There are tiny scenes of Colchani itself, salt houses, salt benches, a toy-sized Palacio de Sal, complete with its jagged rooftop and minuscule salt cars parked outside. You spot a miniature salt train and almost cry from cuteness fatigue. And then there are the textiles, because where there is salt, there are also llamas. And where there are llamas, there is wool. Colchani's side hustle is one of the most ancient in the Andes, shearing, dyeing, and weaving. In the stalls next to the salt artisans, women in layered skirts and felt hats sit behind simple looms, weaving threads into bold, geometric patterns. Diamonds, zigzags, condors, mountains. The colors are intense. Chili reds, electric oranges, deep indigos. You ask one vendor what the patterns mean. Some are old, she says, not looking up from her work. Some we make up as we go. You buy a pair of llama socks. You know full well you'll never wear them. They itch just from being held. But you can't resist. Outside, a group of children runs by, holding a salt sculpture like a trophy. It's an airplane, roughly carved, complete with two stubby wings and a tail. They place it gently on a bench and begin arguing over who gets to be the pilot. You smile, then wince. One of them kicks the bench. The plane loses a wing. The reaction? Laughter, shouting, more carving. Salt planes, it seems, are easily replaced. There's something endearing about how ephemeral the art is. Even the most polished pieces will eventually chip, crack, dissolve. That chess set? useless in a humid apartment. Those salt tiles, don't drop your drink. This isn't art that pretends to last forever. It's proud of its fragility. You pause to watch a man etching a tiny scene into a square salt tile. He draws with a metal pick, scratching a picture of a flamingo standing beside a cactus beneath a crescent moon. You look closer. The flamingo has a hat. You raise an eyebrow. Carnival, he says. Fair enough. Scientists have noted how communities like Colchani use humor and storytelling to embed tradition into their crafts. Salt art is more than decor. It's cultural shorthand. Each piece is part souvenir, part diary, part history lesson, disguised as kitsch. And in a place where time bends and nothing lasts, that feels important. Eventually, you reach the end of the market. A quiet bench sits in the shade of a warped awning. You sit, drink from your water bottle, and examine your haul. Llama socks, a tiny salt flamingo, a salt coaster with an accidental chip. You've decided gives it character. Your bag is heavier, your wallet lighter. You look around and realize that in all this simplicity, this chalky, crunchy, handmade life, there's joy. Not Instagram joy, not influencer joy, but the joy of hands-on living, of crafting something real from a place that barely seems possible. You lean back and stare at the sky, which is so absurdly blue, it makes your teeth ache. And somewhere in that stillness, between the sound of chipping salt and laughing children, you start to feel it again. That peculiar weightlessness, not of body, but of time. By now, you've developed a strange sense of comfort in Colchani. You've learned to navigate its salt-slick streets without slipping. You've grown used to the sting of dry air on your lips. You've started telling time not by clocks, but by shadows and thirst. But today, you ask a question that's been building since the beginning. How do people actually live here? Not just visit, not just sculpt, sell, or mine, but live, cook, clean, bathe, raise kids, grow old, in a place where even the ground tries to steal your moisture. Colchani is not an easy home. It never pretends to be. First, there's the water, or lack of it. Drinking water is trucked in from nearby towns. Some families collect rain in huge plastic barrels during the rare wet season, though, let's be honest, calling it rain is generous. More like sky spit. Locals have become masters at catching, storing, and rationing every drop. You hear one woman joke that their household motto is, "If you can wash your hands with steam, do it." You're not sure if she's kidding. Cooking is another challenge. Boiling water takes forever at this altitude. Scientists point out that water boils at around 88 degrees Celsius, 190 degrees Fahrenheit, up here, which is just warm enough to insult pasta. So recipes are adapted. Potatoes are the staple, often freeze-dried into a product called chuno, hard as rock, light as air, and able to last for years without refrigeration. Add in some quinoa, salt-cured meats, or a handful of wild herbs from lower altitudes, and you've got dinner. Not fancy, but filling. Then there's bathing. If you're imagining long, luxurious showers, don't. Most homes have no indoor plumbing. Baths happen with buckets. You heat water over a stove, pour it carefully into a basin, and work top down. Shampoo is optional. Conditioners are mythical. And every drop of gray water is reused, sometimes for cleaning, sometimes for plants, if you have any. And once, you're told, for chilling drinks. You decide not to investigate further. Toilets vary. Some homes have outhouses. Others share communal facilities that, while functional, offer zero privacy from curious chickens. You try not to make eye contact. Electricity? Sporadic, but present. Many homes now use solar panels, small slanted rectangles glinting on tin rooftops. They're used to charge phones, power radios, maybe run a single light bulb in the evening. The sun is generous. Batteries, less so. Internet is complicated. Some families have patchy Wi-Fi. Others share a single SIM card between cousins. A local teenager named Diego tells you that downloading a movie here is like watching the llama walk to La Paz and back. You ask what people do instead. He shrugs. We talk. We carve. Sometimes we make up songs about tourists who fall on the salt. You decide to walk more carefully. Scientists still debate whether communities like Colchani will be sustainable in the long term. Droughts are intensifying. Global warming is nudging ecosystems out of balance. And while lithium extraction may bring money, it's also drying underground water faster than nature can replace it. Still, people stay. Not out of stubbornness, but out of rhythm. This is their land, their salt, their time. Quirky tidbit. Colchani holds a local cooking contest every September called El Desafío de la Sal, the Salt Challenge. Contestants prepare full meals using only locally sourced ingredients and salt block stoves. You're told last year's winner was a woman who roasted llama ribs over a salt grill while reciting love poems to a passing condor. No one knows if the condor judged her favorably. Children attend the local school, a salt building you passed earlier, with classrooms cooled by airflow gaps and decorated with hand-painted flamingos. They learn Spanish, Quechua, math, and how to recognize safe salt zones. One subject is unique, crystal logic, a class where kids learn to read patterns in salt crystals and predict where harvests will be easiest. Like reading clouds, one teacher tells you, but crunchier. Healthcare? Basic. There's a small clinic staffed by a nurse and visited weekly by a traveling doctor. Colds, cuts, and altitude sickness are handled with a blend of modern meds and ancient herbs. One remedy involves coca leaves, warm salt water, and a chant that roughly translates to, "Don't die, it's too far to bury you." Reassuring. Still, life pulses here, loud and warm. You walk past a salt house with a mural of two dancing skeletons. The door is open. Inside, a mother braids her daughter's hair while a radio plays softly. In the next home, a man repairs a broken salt bench with new blocks, whistling off-key. Children race down the street with empty water jugs, laughing like nothing's wrong. It's not easy, but it works. At a small community center, you're invited to watch a peña, an informal music gathering. Locals bring out guitars, drums, and panpipes. There's dancing, clapping, and at least one llama wandering dangerously close to a speaker. An elder sings a song in Aymara that translates to something like, "Salt is a friend who will never leave unless it rains." Everyone laughs. You do too. Later, someone hands you a mug of warm cinnamon tea. You sit on a salt bench, steam rising in curls. A man beside you says, "It's hard here, but simple. People always want more. We just want what doesn't melt." You nod. Because honestly, that feels like enough. The sun dips low again, and Colchani changes. Not in a dramatic way. There are no flickering neon signs, no crowds pouring into bars, no thumping music. But if you pay attention, really pay attention, you'll notice the shift. The town softens. It exhales. Even the salt seems to sigh. You step outside after dinner, a simple dish of quinoa, roasted root vegetables, and yes, another cup of coca tea. and begin your slow walk through the village. The air has cooled just enough to notice. The wind is gentler now, tugging at your sleeves like a sleepy child. This is Kolchani after dark, and if the day was bright and strange, the night is subtle and haunting. The streets, if you can call them that, are mostly empty. A few children linger near doorways, playing hand games and giggling under their breath. Salt buildings glow under the moonlight like iced cakes left on a table overnight. Their rough textures catch the pale light in streaks and shadows. You tap one with your knuckles. It echoes slightly, like knocking on a loaf of stale bread. In the distance, a dog barks once, then stops. A radio plays something mournful and slow. You can't tell if it's a love song or a weather report. Either way, it fits. As you continue walking, your boots crunch softly. The silence here is never complete. There's always a faint breeze, always the gentle tick of dust against rock, always that soft white static of a town trying not to wake the salt. Scientists still debate the psychological effects of night in high reflectivity, low noise environments. Some believe the absence of visual clutter gives the brain a rare chance to rest. Others suggest it can cause mild disassociation, the feeling that you're walking through a dream, detached from the usual rhythm of reality. Honestly, you don't need a paper to confirm it. Tonight doesn't feel real. You pass the cemetery again. It looks different now, quieter, somehow more respectful. The salt headstones shimmer faintly in the moonlight, and the plastic flowers reflect like little ghosts. A breeze lifts the edges of an old prayer flag tied to a wooden stake. It flutters once, then stills. Quirky tidbit. Locals say that salt remembers sound, especially at night. Some believe that if you press your ear to a salt wall after sunset, you can hear voices. Not ghosts necessarily, but echoes. Old conversations, songs, whispers carried across time. You try it, and you do hear something. But it might just be your own breath bouncing off minerals. You walk toward the edge of town, where the salt flats begin again. There are no streetlights, just moon, just silence, just space. The flats stretch outward like a silver ocean. No waves, no movement, just stillness that hurts to look at. It feels like the world ends just a few meters beyond where you stand. And then, something moves. A light, flickering, low to the ground. Not fire, not a car, just a flicker. You stop, blink, it's gone. You ask around the next day and someone shrugs. Maybe a miner, they say. Or maybe the white lady checking her salt. You laugh. They don't. Back in the village center, a few buildings glow with dim yellow lights. One cafe is still open. You step inside, order hot tea, and sit near the salt-paneled wall. The owner is an old man with a beard like powdered sugar and eyes that don't blink enough. He tells you a story about a house that used to be on the far edge of the flats, built entirely from salt like everything else. Only one man lived there, a sculptor. Every night he'd carve a new piece. Birds, llamas, saints, demons. He never sold them, just left them in the yard. One morning, the house was gone. No collapse, no footprints, just gone, like it dissolved into fog. Maybe the salt took him back, the old man says, and refills your tea. Scientists have tested salt's ability to self-heal. Crystals can grow and fuse over time, especially in humid environments. It's fascinating in a lab, slightly terrifying in a village where the walls whisper and houses might disappear like fog. You finish your drink, thank the man, and step back outside. The night has grown colder. Your breath ghosts into the air in short, shallow puffs. You walk back toward your room, watching the stars above. Out here, they're absurd. Too many. Too bright. Too sharp. Like someone dusted diamonds across a black tablecloth. There's Orion. There's the Southern Cross. There's one star that pulses like it's laughing at you. Colchini doesn't sleep like most places. It hums. It waits. It creaks gently, as if adjusting itself against the silence. As you unlock your door, the salt walls seem to lean just slightly inward, like they're listening. You say goodnight anyway, just in case. You lie on your bed and close your eyes. The sounds of the town drift in. A dog bark, a crunch of footsteps, the hiss of distant wind. And beneath all that, the salt. The quiet, ancient salt. Always watching. Always waiting, never entirely still. It's your last day in Colchani. The sky is cloudless. Again, of course it is. You wake with the sun pouring through the small, salt-framed window of your room, turning the interior a soft, sleepy gold. For a while, you just lie there, staring at the grainy ceiling, wondering if you've always heard your heartbeat this clearly. Because something happens in Colchani. Something slow. Something invisible. You change. Not in some cinematic, sweeping life purpose way, but in subtler shifts. You've learned to walk slower, to listen longer. You've grown used to the taste of mineral air, the weight of silence. Your phone battery, oddly, has lasted longer than usual. Maybe the salt has opinions on screen time. Today, the town feels unusually still, even for Colchani. You step outside, and something's off. Not wrong, just heavy, like the salt crust thickened overnight. Then you notice the men walking quietly, steadily, toward the flats. They're not miners this time. They're surveyors, engineers, a small team in high-vis vests, boots that crunch less, and clipboards with too many tabs. You follow from a distance, keeping to the path, until you reach the edge of a large, newly cleared patch of ground. There's an orange flag, a sign staked into the salt, a logo you don't recognize. One of the locals, an older man you saw sculpting tiny salt churches yesterday, approaches with a frown. More machines, he mutters. More digging. They say they won't go deep. You ask if people are worried. He shrugs. We're always worried. But salt holds more than worry. That sentence stays with you the rest of the day. Because here's the truth. Colchani is balancing. Between past and future. Between hand-carved souvenirs and high-tech lithium extraction. Between reverence for the land and the pressure to extract its veins dry. The town lives in a mineral limbo, where even the ground it's built on could vanish slowly or suddenly, depending on what lies beneath. Scientists still argue whether the salt crust will endure under expanding industry. With more brine being pumped out each year to feed the world's energy hunger, the flats could become unstable. Microfractures, sinkholes, shifting loads. Some call it alarmist, others call it overdue. Either way, it's happening. But the townspeople, they're not panicking. They're planting. Yes, planting. You round a corner near the market and see it. a raised bed garden built atop a platform of salt bricks and plastic sheeting. Inside are herbs, hardy greens, even a tomato plant wearing a sun hat made from a cut-up soda bottle. A small solar panel powers a drip system. It's a modest garden, but it's also defiance. Salt can't stop us, says the gardener, a woman in her 50s with hands like sandpaper and eyes like mirrors. It just reminds us not to waste. You walk back through town one last time. The salt artisans are back at work, carving, painting, laughing. A boy waves to you with a salt llama tucked under his arm. The flamingo mural on the school wall looks brighter today. Or maybe you just finally noticed the yellow eyes peeking from the clouds above it. You reach the edge of town. The horizon shimmers, and the flats stretch endlessly into white. A few new mining domes rise far in the distance, faint as mirages. You stare at them for a while. Salt built this town. Salt fed it. Salt may one day reclaim it. But for now, it's still here. Still carving. Still singing. Still standing, one crumbly, brilliant, impossible brick at a time. The salt flats are behind you now, tucked away in memory, like a dream that left a little grit on your skin. Colchany drifts in and out of your thoughts. Its soft textures, its whispering walls, its strange sense of stillness that somehow made you feel more awake. You remember the way the light shimmered without mercy, how the ground seemed to hum beneath your feet, how time slipped sideways when no one was watching. And yet, the details remain vivid. A llama statue with crooked ears, the salt church with a missing bell. That moment when the salt breeze carried a story to you, not with words, but with weight. You picture it now as you close your eyes. The pink lake, still as glass. The rusted trains, creaking softly in the wind. The artisans shaping memory into souvenirs that flake just slightly at the corners. The silence of night broken only by the breath of the flats. In Colchany, nothing is permanent, but everything matters. So breathe in deeply. Let your muscles ease. Let the weight of the day dissolve like salt in warm water. Let the edges soften, your thoughts, your heartbeat, the corners of the room around you. Let sleep find you the way Colchany does, slowly, gently, without asking. You are not lost. You are only still. And sometimes that's more than enough.